industry, so thank you so much. And Chris does a great job of really explaining what Livermore is about, and bringing that outside perspective of someone that just has a really broad array of what are great wine growing regions. And ultimately Livermore Valley is because of the soil and because of the weather coming through. So a little bit about my family and how we came to be where we are is 1870s. My great-great-grandfather leaves his home just south of Hanover in a little horse farm town called Neheim, comes to the U.S., drives a team of horses across the U.S., wants to go to California, the land of opportunity for a hardworking German. When he got there, he went to the Napa Valley, and he worked for Charles Krug for 10 years. So he spent 10 years learning the art and the trade of growing grapes and making wine from Charles Krug. And then he got married, and he said, I better set up my homestead. And then so he said, I'm going to go to the best growing region in California. I'm going to go to the best known growing region in California. I'm going to go where the pioneers are bringing in the source material, where the Charles Wetmore is bringing in the Vitis vinifera. Only 6 years earlier it came to be, but those in the know, which was my great-great-grandfather at that time, knew it takes great grapes to make great wines, and it takes great grapes and then great soils and then a great climate. And so chose all of those things, set up shop in Livermore in 1883. Since then, we've had consecutive vintages all the way through, making us the oldest continuously family-owned and operated winery. Same winery, same family, same place, vintage all the way through. We tip our hat to the Concannon family and the Catholic Church for helping us stay alive through Prohibition. But ultimately, post-Prohibition, that really gave us a great competitive advantage because we were already rolling. Like the winery was going, we had the teams, we had the staff, we had the pumps, we had the hoses, and we just kept right on going through. So something that I'm personally so proud of, to be literally, standing on the shoulders of giants and taking advantage of the beautiful vineyard holdings that we have in the Livermore Valley. So we talked about Livermore Valley and the diversity. We're growing like 22 different cultivars of grapes in the Livermore Valley, and I'm very proud of all of them. I would love to sit down and taste you through every single one of those because we can get a beautiful expression of each of those grapes coming through. And that really has to do with my great-grandfather Ernest Wente, my grandfather and namesake Karl Wente, and then most importantly in my life is my uncle Phil Wente, who was overseeing all of the farming operation before. And the last time I talked to Chris, he talked about the fog dog. Does anybody know what a fog dog is? The dog literally goes out and he sits on the spot in the area closest to the ranch. The dog doesn't go too far. He sits on the spot, which is the first place that the fog breaks. How does
actually a word that you can look up in the Oxford Dictionary.
So, but that dog knows exactly where the fog's going to break. And it doesn't break in the same spot every day. Yeah, it's similar and yeah, it's close. And how that dog knows that blows my mind. But it really made me think that my Uncle Phil is the fog dog to me because this gentleman has the best knowledge of the Livermore Valley out of anybody I know. Right? He knows those locations. He knows those spots. He knows it's a little warmer. It's a little cooler. It's a little higher clay content. Chardonnay, Petit Syrah do great there. Merlot, a little higher gravel content. Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet. So really, Phil was so instrumental in choosing all of these specific locations that really laid the foundation for the growing of the flavors and textures that are in a glass of wine. So you fast forward beyond Charles Wetmore, the Louis Mel, Robert Concannon, Jim Concannon, Robert Livermore, all of these pioneers that were instrumental in bringing cuttings, Vitis vinifera, right? It takes those great grapevines, those great cultivars to make world-class wines. Fast forward to 1912, and Chardonnay enters the stage, right? There's this great white grape of Burgundy. You look around California, can't find it. 1912, we planted the first Chardonnay in our vineyard in Livermore. So you get these cuttings from France, put them in the ground. As you all know, grapevines are phenomenal creatures. You take a cutting, you stick it in the ground, you walk away. That vine is intuitive enough to sprout its roots, grow up. You take that cutting and you propagate it forward. So from 1912, from then on, if you wanted Chardonnay, you came to the Wente family in Livermore. A few generations later, a few decades later, you might go to somebody that came from Livermore 10 years earlier and take that and propagate it forward. And if you were a grower that wanted to get Chardonnay, you'd look at really two characteristics. Healthy vine because obviously that makes sense. And then second is during harvest, you would walk through and you would taste berries, and you would gravitate and you'd put some flagging tape on a vine that tasted best, right? We're in the business of delivering beautiful fruit flavors in a glass. And then so now based on that propagation forward, now literally 80%, 80,000 acres worth of Chardonnay in California came through our ranch in 1912. Sometimes that blows my mind, but it's really just the right place and the right time, and that knowledge of what Livermore is, but then also the knowledge of farming and nurturing those flavors. So literally every year since 1912, a Wente family member has been out in the field in these Chardonnay vineyards, tasting these berries and selecting vines forward. So it's so awesome to say that we have 4 vineyards in Livermore that have never, the genetic material has never left our property in Livermore. Since 1912. It's pretty amazing. And we're going out now, my Uncle Phil and I, side by side, tasting berries off of these vines, and you get one like, wow, that just jumps out in terms of that vibrancy. And then Phil, Fog Dog, and also one of the best palates that I know of really, we see how that translates through into that bottle of wine, and we take and we flag it, and we plant another vineyard. So Phil and I together, side by side, have put 3 more vineyards in, and we actually started segregating the flavors, because the muscat characteristic that will come from Chardonnay, really that vibrancy, there's a green apple note, and then there's a stone fruit and an apricot fruit. Really those 3 segregations. And now in front of our winery in Livermore, literally 27.2 miles that way, there's a vineyard that we've planted where we segregated those flavors. And this is now the 5th year out of that vineyard. So now there's enough fruit. We actually pressed them separately and made all the wine separately, a whopping 1 barrel of each. But I really wanted to bring them and show, because it's so cool in terms of how those flavors play through. They're exact same vineyard, exact same everything right there, but the diversity of flavors is so large in terms of what goes through. So it's really sort of that history and foundation of the Chardonnay clone, and why Central Coast California Chardonnay is really one of the most fruit-forward styles of Chardonnay in the world. Yes, people put oak on it, there's surly aging, there's batonnage, all those things that I'm going to talk about when we get to this wine here, because it has all of those things. But what's key is the fruit structure of that wine, of these wines, of the California wines, have the ability to hold up, which help to define that style. So, you know, pretty cool phenomenon, pretty cool that it's living history that I'm going out there. And I really took my Uncle Phil, like, if no one tells you this stuff, if no one walks you through a vineyard and does it, but he grabbed me one day and said, we're going. And we spent hours just walking through, and I'm literally like, oh my gosh, this is literally the coolest thing I've ever done. It might seem trivial walking through a vineyard tasting those berries, but really seeing how those flavors then translate through into that glass of wine. So that was 1912. You go into the 30s, 40s. My family, Ernest, Herman Wente was instrumental in getting the Wine Institute started. You go forward even further to the 4th generation. My father, Eric, my aunt Carolyn, our chief executive officer right now, and my uncle Phil were very instrumental in continuing to drive and nurture the Livermore Valley. Right? Chris talked about how the number of wineries was down almost to single digits, not quite. And now we're back up at 50, and that was really just embracing that culture and being willing to make sure water is delivered to the next new grower and winery that wants to come in. This guy needs barrels. This guy wants some fruit to get it going, because we want a vibrant location that is Livermore. And my family, and mostly Phil, that passion that sort of came through, is wanted to continue to see Livermore, you know, realize the phenomenal potential that it has. And with that, now there's such an array of talented winemakers and passionate people in the valley that are really showcasing the diversity, the breadth of what we have. So I'm so honored and proud to be 5 generations in, but I'm equally as honored and proud to be amongst these people that are so passionate about it. Steve and I spent a fair bit of time together. Colllin and I spent a fair bit of time together tasting wine, talking about it. Steve is always opening bottles of wine from all over the world, and we're talking about it. We're talking about how our style, our passion, our pursuit are going to come forward and get through to these glasses of wine. So proud to be part of this group, proud of Livermore Valley, and thank you all so much for coming here and helping us continue to share these awesome stories from an awesome place with awesome history, with awesome soil, with an awesome potential to sort of continue to grow and thrive. So some people, like, I'll finish talking, like, wow, you're passionate about it. I don't really, like, I guess obviously I am, but it is such a cool thing to be part of.
You should see him talk about this with a guitar in his hand.
True that. So, but on to the wine. You know, the reason why I get so passionate about all of it, because how cool is it to have a job where at the end of all of it, you have a glass of wine as your end product. So, this is our nth degree Chardonnay. And this is 100% Wente clone Chardonnay from 2 of those vineyards that I had talked about, where my Uncle Phil and I were out there propagating them for and getting there. Then it's picked, you know, I usually pick Chardonnay based on, you know, flavors out there and then acidity, right? Not as much about what that sugar is, what the Brix level is, but I want those flavors to be there, but I also want the acidity to be a backbone that's going to carry the wine through and through. After I graduated from graduate school at Davis, I went to Peter Michael Winery in the Knights Valley. How many people have heard of Peter Michael? I have Peter Michael wine, right? It's a good spot, a good place to learn, a good place to cut your teeth right off. And one of the wines that they have was Cuvée Indigène, which is just the indigenous fermentation. And they had natural fermentations through most all of their Chardonnays. So it's something that I really embrace going through Chardonnays as well. So this is predominantly naturally fermented. So it's a slower fermentation, takes its time, gets through. It's 100% barrel fermented, about 60, between 50 and 60% new. And my favorites are Francois Ferrer and Louis Latour. You know, there's some others that play through, but Francois Ferrer, they toast those barrels till they almost blister, big, rich, you know, almost that burnt marshmallow characteristics, versus Louis Latour, much leaner, much sort of cleaner coming through. So then barrel ferment, all right, so you pick it based on acidity and those flavors, barrel fermented, and then natural fermentation. At the end of that natural fermentation, the yeast settles down to the bottom, start batonnage, surly aging, once a week. Why once a week? Frankly, that's what they taught me at Peter Michael in my first job. And they were making great wines at Peter Michael, so you know, you go along that path and it's something that works. Malolactic fermentation, something I get the wines through. We get the wines through, but I don't want to overexpress the butter because butter will sort of step on some of those beautiful fruit characteristics. So I want the fruit to shine. I want the oak, the beautiful French wood, the surly aging and complexity to shine through. All the while, it's like for those that want to geek out with me, it's like a 339 pH, right? So it's a pretty low pH for nice acidity that carries it through. So with that, I'm going to walk away, and my sister Christine, also the 5th generation, is probably going to say, dude, you speak so quickly when you're going through, slow down a little bit. But I am so sort of passionate and proud of who and what we are in the Livermore Valley, the history that we have with the families that go through. But then also, you know, let's be honest, it is about right here, right now, today, and the awesome folks that we have that are passionate about what they do. So thank you all so much. Yeah.